Not yet. Not
And
yet.
and they want to shut it down. And there's those commercials, I remember them, that this is what drugs do to your brain. And I recall specifically in the day when ecstasy, in the 90s, 2000s, first started becoming really popular that I was aware of,
Mhm.
you would hear how bad ecstasy is, especially ecstasy. Don't do that one. That's bad. That's not really true, right? It's taken out of
Yeah.
context.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and is that just because it's like any drug people know nothing about? They start thinking the worst of it?
Well, there's always a couple of things. If you hear something about a psychedelic,
Hmm.
you have to pay attention to dose. The same way you would not take 10 painkillers when you're only supposed to take two is the same way you should not take grams and grams of MDMA when you're supposed to take milligrams. So that's number one.
Or a bottle of penicillin. Because the way I look at it is it's just another drug. There's plenty of them in the pharmacy. Let a doctor decide what's good for the patient. You would not tell your mechanic what part they should fix your car with. And yes, if he gives you a prescription of anything, you take too many, it's not going to work. So, how is it
Right.
that this drug gets stereotypically portrayed as being terrible and it's going to harm you, and then
Well,
thus illegal,
yeah.
illegal in the end, right?
Yeah, Michael Pollan in How to Change Your Mind does a beautiful job laying out all the history. I mean, the
Hmm.
short story is that there was research about MDMA in the 50s and 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and the drug wars kind of, for political reasons, drugs were a great thing to attack. And so all of the research basically stopped. And luckily, Rick Doblin, who runs MAPS, he basically said, look, this is a healing modality for PTSD. Our veterans are a population that have a high occurrence of PTSD. Let me go through the government regulation route to at least focus on this population to get this legal. And that's basically what he's done. That's why the clinical trials are where they are. And that's why August 11th, hopefully the FDA does approve the therapy. There's been a little bit of static,
That's
not
in
unanticipated,
a couple days from now.
couple of days.
Wow. So by the time this podcast even airs, we will know if it's legal or
Well,
not.
no. Yeah.
So if it's legal, your story's been great. It will help people understand what it's going to be like. What if it's not legal? What's the next thing that you and the people that believe we have to do this for the veterans and the people suffering? It's a great treatment option. They should be legally allowed to do. What would be your next step if that happened?
Well, so first of all, I'm pretty optimistic. The FDA has been working with MAPS since 2017. They labeled this
Okay.
therapy breakthrough designation, which means there's nothing else on the market that has the result that this does. And so a lot of the questions and concerns that are coming up right now, the FDA actually knew about. You can't run a blind trial with psychedelics. The group that gets the psychedelics know they got the psychedelics. So like that was one major complaint. So let's just put this in perspective that the people right now who are raising complaints are have not been involved from the start the way that the FDA has. So that's one of the reasons why I'm optimistic.
Okay.
Secondly, if it doesn't happen now, what most people are saying is that all that'll happen is that the FDA will say, okay, wait a minute, we see some of these other concerns. Let's go back for another trial. So in essence, it could just be delayed. I don't know the timeline for that.
Okay.
Optimistic at least, in my lifetime, it'll become available. And that doesn't don't freak out everybody. I'm in my 50s. I'm not saying like it'll take another 40 years or something, but like I do
Okay.
think it's going to happen.
It
I
won't
just
be
don't.
a ban. Be like they won't be introducing a new law that supersedes an old law and even makes it more illegal or something sneaky
Gosh, I
like
hope
that.
not.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
So what about mushrooms? Because your book title says with a dash of mushrooms. And why is there a dash of mushrooms
Yeah.
in there? That's like part of the recipe for all of this?
So, one of the benefits of not being part of the clinical trial and working with experts with whom I was working was that when I came up, my first journey was September, my second journey was December, my third journey was not until May. So we really took our time in between. And I had a major nightmare March. Basically, I had a nightmare of myself in the childhood home where my mother had attempted to kill herself multiple times, the last time with a shotgun. She survived. But I was trapped in that childhood home. And through visualization and talk therapy, the door to that home wouldn't appear. By the way, I'm big on using imagination and visualization in therapy. I think it's a really underrated tool. And that's one of the things we were doing. And in the conversations leading up to the third journey, my guide and therapist said, look, whatever trauma is there, it's pretty big. If we are in the MDMA session and we still can't get you out of that house, would you be willing to have a little bit of psilocybin, magic mushrooms?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I trust you folks. Absolutely. And that's what happened. About 2-ish hours into the journey, I introduced my therapist and guide to this little girl that was trapped in that childhood home, terrified. And they basically gave me a very low dose of psilocybin. And that part of the journey allowed me to kind of like bust my childhood home open and be free of it. It's called a hippie flip, kind of in the recreational circles, but my therapist used it therapeutically for me.
So, what's the chemical? How would they work chemically? Because my question is, and I'm an engineer, so bear with me. This is my analytical mind. How come just a higher dosage of the MDMA wouldn't give the same effect? Or why wouldn't just mushrooms give the same effect?
You know what? I can't wait for the research to actually be able to answer your question. I can only answer it from a patient perspective.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
I'm so looking forward to when we understand the mechanisms more.
Which is a hard thing to do. The whole neuroscience is because you
It's
can't
really hard.
experiment on people. You can let them watch you and you can give them feedback. Oh, sure, you guys are the experts. I'll take a little more mushroom next time, except that you're getting well again. So there's that factor to in your
Right.
data too.
Right. You're not really staying at that start line, the start line.
Right.
Right.
So in terms of mushrooms, tell listeners who don't